Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast that tells the story behind the book. It includes insights from authors about how they compose their work, what inspires them, and what they hope you'll take away from their book. Here's your host for this episode of Books on Air, Suzanne Harris.
Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Sloan Fremont, filling in for Suzanne Harris. This is a podcast where listeners get the secret story behind every book. Joining me today is Steve Hamilton, author of the book, A Scandal of the Particular. In this book, Steve pulls back the judicial curtain and takes the reader along to show them an up-close and personal look at some of the players in this game we call the criminal justice system. So, Steve, I want to welcome you to the Books on Air podcast.
Well, great. It's a real pleasure to have a chance to talk to you today.
So let's start out by telling the audience just a little bit about yourself and what led you to write your book, A Scandal of the Particular.
Sure. I was a former Crown Attorney in Canada, which is a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor for over 30 years. I did everything from murder to mayhem, and I wanted to write a book to sort of talk about, from a prosecutor's point of view, what's involved in a criminal case and also what's behind a criminal case. And when I say that, I'm talking about the players, the judges, the victims, the lawyers, their spouses, their relationships. Sometimes you've heard the term maybe a voir dire. That's what we use in Canada. That means a trial within a trial. So those that conduct trials also have trials in their own lives going on at the same time. And so give the reader a chance to think about the issues that are involved in the criminal justice system today, and also what's going on with the players.
Yeah. And so I'm sure in your experience, you saw a lot of different patterns play out over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the one thing I think that people maybe don't get is that the criminal justice system is best compared, I think, to a slaughterhouse. Oh. It's like I Love Lucy, with the chocolates keep coming. And so often, Hollywood or maybe another book will portray a defense lawyer where they do one particular case. Mm-hmm. And then when it's over, everybody celebrates, the innocent party goes free, everybody's happy. But in a prosecutor's case and in the criminal justice system, it's one case of many. They keep coming. They keep piling up. And so that's sort of the difference, I think, in terms of what I look at in terms of criminal cases and the people that are involved, because it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
It's a slaughterhouse. It just keeps piling up.
Yeah. And, when we see it portrayed in TV or books or whatever, it's always very clean cut, right? There's just this linear line where everything just follows. And then at the end, you have a perfect resolution. But I'm sure in your experience, that isn't actually real life. And how do you manage that? Or how did you manage that in your time with these cases that just keep coming, and all the other facets that you see, all these different players that you see in there, and the things that you start to maybe recognize or see behind the scenes that the average person doesn't necessarily ever even think about?
Well, how I used to start my day is somebody would come in before court and they would say to me, Steve, I'm going to tell you about the worst thing that ever happened to me. And they would be followed the next 15 or 20 minutes by a person that would come in and say, Steve, I'm going to tell you about the worst possible thing that ever happened to me. So it's compartmentalizing a bit of that, but it's also reliving their experiences. One of the things that I talk about in the book is that many social workers or family members, when there's a traumatic event like a murder or a terrible accident where somebody's really hurt badly, a paraplegic, let's say, or a quadriplegic, they say, you have to move on. Don't forget about it. You need to put this out of your mind. Mm-hmm. But as a prosecutor or as a criminal lawyer, you have to say, I want to ask you about this in microscopic detail.
Right.
forget what all the social workers told you.
Right.
We're now going to go, and this may be damaging to you,
Right.
to go back and to relive this, but this is what we need to do. Because on the other side of the fence here, the defense lawyer is going to pick away why you didn't describe how many buttons were on your sweater when you were raped,
Mm-hmm.
how you didn't see the person that plunged the knife into your partner and leave the room, all of those types of questions. So it's quite different.
Yeah, and even as on the human side of that, I mean, I would assume there's some element of people's psyche that blocks out all of this, right, in order to survive whatever they've been through, which would make your job, I would think, that much harder, because you're trying to dig out these things that maybe someone doesn't want to face, or has blocked off, maybe not even knowing, and then those kinds of details matter, and so that would be very difficult as well.
It is difficult, and one of the cases I remember, and I make mention of it in a fictional sense in the book, it was a story about two Indigenous women that were in a residential school, which is a very popular topic here in North America, and they were sexually assaulted by their principal or headmaster, and they were told again, like, none of this is your fault, and don't think about what happened. And the problem with that is that we remove them from the process. And what I mean by that is that we're told that they don't really have a stake in the process.
Right.
They can tell their story, but the lawyers will take care of it, the judges will rule on it, and the public will hear about it. But we've totally removed them from the whole process.
Right.
And so they ask the question that many people ask, why bother?
Yeah.
Why go on? And those are difficult questions. And so what I wanted to do with my book is to get people to think about some of those questions, some of those challenges, not just a book where it's A to B in terms of linear. There's a crime, there's a solution. This is what it is.
Yes.
I wanted you to think about that, and that's why I wrote the particular book that I did.
Yeah, that bigger story. So let's get into that a little more. Tell us about some of the characters, maybe when and where your book takes place.
Sure. Well, my main character is Hyman Kazan, and Kazan is a fellow who is a senior lawyer in Vancouver, Canada, and he's on the cutting floor, the slaughterhouse, day after day. Cases are coming in, and he gets assigned a case of a young gay man who is killed, and the police believe it's involved, or the person that was responsible for the murder, it was a judge. So this gets him interested, because now the criminal justice system is on trial, the judge is on trial. But what makes matters worse is that his longtime love partner says to him, oh, by the way, I'm involved in a relationship with the same judge.
Oh.
So now how do you deal with you're seeking justice in the criminal justice system, and you're also seeking justice for yourself?
Yeah.
And you're dealing with jealousy, you're dealing with revenge, you're dealing with retribution, all of those issues on both levels. And how do you navigate that? And that's the questions that the protagonist says. How do I navigate this?
Yeah. And I'm picturing that as we talked about, not being a linear line, right? There's all these offshoots of a situation, right? Where the moral side of it, the questions that a person would ask, even that, like you said, that almost like defeat before it even starts, right? If someone's asking the question, why bother? Because of all these things that play into it that are so far out of a person's control who was the victim in any situation. And in that machine of the criminal justice system then takes over and becomes the driver. And it's like the victim, the person that was wronged, is sitting there and supposed to maybe go along for the ride as the observer of the situation, and the emotion is not supposed to be there, which is absolutely, you know, impossible and unfair. You know, it seems very much like a defeat before you start with that kind of system driving it, I guess.
Yeah. And maybe in, like, you're in Tennessee, I believe, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so it's quite different when I talk about Vancouver. Vancouver is rainy and gray. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
they compare it to England. They say that you know it's summer in Vancouver because the rain is warm. Um, it's a situation where the weather is also a character in my book, and there's always complaining about the weather, but it's just a metaphor for, well, why do we complain about these things that are just weather? You
Yeah.
know, they don't really matter. We,
Yeah.
we focus on the things that we can control, and the things that we can't control. Why are we focused on those? Same as maybe holding on to a relationship that's ending. You know, maybe we're trying to control that, and the protagonist goes through those types of questions too. And at the end, he realizes that, you know, the weather is fine. It's only rain.
And that, you know, the lack of control, right? These things that we all do want to control, and how those types of, just the weather, for example, as you mentioned, how then that starts a domino effect of, you know, feeling like we have, like, focusing on those kinds of things that are so out of our control, that we're not looking at our own situation and what we can control.
Yeah, well, and when you think about the criminal justice system, just think right now, if you were to pick up the phone and to phone your local police force, right away, the criminal justice wheels are starting to grind,
Right.
and your control over that is gone.
Right.
Now, whether it's a family court case or a criminal case, you turn over your autonomy to a third party, like a judge,
Mm-hmm.
like a police force. You lose control,
Mm-hmm.
and you may have the same morality or the same way of looking at things, or you may want the same, what you see as a just outcome, whether it's custody of your children or the resolution of a criminal matter. But once you let that go, that person, that third party, may not share your view,
Right.
may not share your morality. Then what?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
just
mean,
start with a phone call.
and tell us a little bit about how you feel that we all have a role to play in the welfare of others.
Yeah, I use the term all suicides are murders, because
Mm-hmm.
there's always events that are leading up to somebody taking their life, and that's why I think we do all have a role to play in the welfare of others. And you see it with victims all the time. You see it in your daily life. I'm sure you see it. That maybe something you said, maybe something you've done. If it's a criminal case, there's never a victim that's just one victim.
Mm-hmm.
Even the accused family is affected by the outcome of their actions. The accused is affected.
Right.
The community is affected. It has a ripple effect. And so it's just sort of that view that all of us have a role to play in the welfare of others. I honestly
Yeah.
believe that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that goes back to what we just talked about with focusing on what we can control, right? Because we can control our interaction with others and our, you know, the way we behave with other people. That is something that is in our control, but it's often looked at the other way. Well, because this person did this, now I'm doing that. And we don't
Right.
necessarily have to live that way, right? We are in control of our emotions and ourself if we choose to be. Otherwise, we're just kind of floating along, letting everything, you know, take us where maybe we don't want to go.
Yeah, you often hear that in terms of an assault, eh? I just
Yeah.
lost it.
Yeah.
I just lost it.
Yeah.
Did you really lose it, or did you choose to lose
Right.
it?
Exactly. Exactly. So tell us some of the words you would describe, or maybe the themes you would use to describe your book.
Yeah, I use the words raw and candid,
Hmm.
honest, because again, it's not just a simple telling of a tale of a criminal case. It's questions that are posed.
Yeah.
Why go on? What does it matter? Why do we interact the way we do? What really matters in terms of outcomes? What is justice? All those questions are posed. They're not answered for the reader. They're
Right.
posed. They're posed in terms of the scenarios. I think sometimes I compare it to like an orange. You know, you take apart an orange, and you can see it when it's together, but there's the segments, and each segment can
Mhm.
be looked upon independently. And same with my book. I hope anyway. That's the goal. Is that when I started my book, the first chapter, there's a reference to Hyman Kazan moving to Vancouver and after the passing of a friend, and he was reflecting on the few scribbled lines that are in the obit and wanting not to have his life recalled like that,
Mhm.
foreshadowing perhaps what happens down the road, not to give anything away. But so I think that I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if it does, but
Yeah.
it's those independent thoughts, the moments that make up your life that comprise your whole life. It's not just one simple moment. It's all those complexities and how they affect you, right down to whether it's raining outside.
Yeah. Yeah. And those bigger questions and I think when, why this, having this perspective that you have of being, uh, in the criminal justice system for so long and seeing those different parts, but also helping the reader understand that there are different parts, right? Because for someone who is not in the criminal justice system daily, it seems like it just moves as one unit. You don't think about the pieces of it that make the unit, right? And to pull those pieces apart and understand that, well, everybody involved has, not only are they dealing with their own personal stuff, right, that can sometimes then influence what's happening in their jobs and things, taking it
Right.
apart and being able to show the reader that, I think is I really liked that perspective, because again, personally, I've never really thought of the different parts. I always thought of it as one faceless unit moving forward.
Right. Do you know the recent case that was very popular was Murdaugh, right? The fellow that was the lawyer that was involved in the murder of his son and wife.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Do you know the name of the prosecutor?
I didn't follow that one very closely. I'm aware of it, but I didn't follow it.
Okay. His name was Crichton Waters. And so his whole life was put on hold while he prepared for this case.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one case. I don't know if next week, maybe they gave him a week off after that case, but after that, he's next faced with another case.
Yeah.
And he went through this case that the media watched and they focused on the defense lawyers and they talked a little bit about him. But what was the effect on his life
Yeah.
dealing with that case? And next day, when that case is done, there's another chocolate, to use the Lucy analogy, rolling down the uh, the treadmill or the conveyor belt that
Yeah.
he has to take on,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yeah.
just as important to that person
Right.
or
Right.
more.
Right. Yeah. Um, Such big questions and things to think about. What would you say sets your book apart from other books?
I think it's because it's not written in a linear manner.
Mm-hmm.
It's the protagonist thinking about these issues. Hopefully, the reader will think about these issues, trying to resolve his own personal problems. How does that get resolved? It's written in that sense, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's not a simplistic book. It's one that's philosophical. It's one that I hope causes the reader to think about bigger issues. Um, it's written by a criminal lawyer. It's not written by a corporate commercial lawyer. It's not written to just simply entertain. I hope
Mm-hmm.
that there's entertaining aspects to it, but it's also written to make you think about those other questions. At the
Yeah.
end of the book, I list a number of lawyers who I knew who couldn't survive the slaughterhouse.
Mm.
They either fell into alcohol, they fell into drugs, or they took their own lives
Mm-hmm.
because of those issues that
Yeah.
are portrayed in the book. So it's not, we all think about, I don't know, I'm dating myself because I'm older than you, but Perry Mason, we all know Perry Mason.
Yeah.
What happened to Hamilton Berger, the prosecutor? Nobody thinks about, they don't even know the name. And he was a major character in that series in the
Mm-hmm.
50s and the 60s. But that's what it is. It's posing those questions and being different from that to give people a look behind the judicial curtain. Like I say, we trust our lives. We
Yeah.
trust our security of person to a judge who in Canada is appointed, which is a whole other dialogue, but in your country is elected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. What are we? Who are these people, and how
Yeah.
are they held accountable? You know?
Yeah. And what I like about hearing what you're saying there is that another theme I'm getting from this is almost encouraging people to look at, I don't want to say bigger picture because that's not it, but look at the other details around things, because often in a case like it's Perry Mason, like you said, right, everybody knows that character.
Yeah.
You're watching him on the screen, but not paying attention to what's going on around Perry Mason in the scenes, right? The other characters. And I'm just thinking about that in life, right? We're often maybe socially, encouraged to look at whatever maybe the news tells you to look at that day, right? This particular person or this particular situation. But what I like what you're saying it sounds like, again, to me, one of the themes of your book is that there's more to just that one person. There's that bigger picture around it, and looking at that and understanding that more gives you the bigger picture, I guess. It helps you to see that more than just maybe the narrow tunnel vision that maybe we're used to in different things in our lives.
Yeah, I hope so. I think the other thing is that sometimes if I'm talking to like college students or younger lawyers, I'll say it's a flawed system, and they'll look at me, a flawed system, and I say because people are flawed.
Yeah, yeah,
There's an appeal process that might deal with the issue in the case, but we're not dealing with the people.
yeah,
And we have this expectation that everything's going to turn out. Justice will be found. Well, we don't find people innocent. We find them not guilty.
yeah. Big difference,
There's a
right?
difference,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
I hope those are the types of things that come out in those types of discussions.
yeah. Steve, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you for joining us today. Before we close out, what do you hope readers learn or take away after reading your book?
I just hope it starts a dialogue. I hope that it reveals the players and people question the players at the front of the room. Most people if you ever go into a courtroom, you just see the back of heads.
Yeah.
If you think
Yeah.
about that, you just see the back of the lawyers. You see the judge's face, but you don't see them. So
Yeah.
what's going on in their lives that will affect the outcome of the case that's before you?
Yeah.
And think of them differently. We think of them as perhaps robotic in terms of going through the facts of the law or whatever, but it's far from that.
Yeah.
Think of the players, think of the effect of the case on them, and think of what's the next case. How does this all work together?
Mm-hmm.
And I hope it gives a revealing look at the justice system, other than what we just see from A to B. It goes to C, D, and the rest.
Yeah.
I hope anyway.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I want to thank you for joining us today. Steve is the author of the book, A Scandal of the Particular, and I'll link to the book in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join us for the next Books on Air podcast. Remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.